sister, and friend. She was young when she met and married her husband. His name is Dennis. And soon after that, they started a family. They had 3 children together, 2 girls and a boy, Barbie, Danessa, and Dennison. I thought it was strange that they named a daughter Danessa and a son Dennison, and the dad's name is Dennis. I feel like that's so confusing, but, do what you do, Martha. The relationship between Martha and Dennis was not the stuff of fairy tales, as it so happens here on Geekwares. According to the daughter Danessa and the son Dennison, where I got most of the quotes for tonight's video, their marriage was volatile, violent. Dennis would take Martha by the hair, he would throw her into the wall, he would rip her clothing, he would hit her in the face, he would grab whatever he could get his hands on and hit her with it, a belt, a vase, whatever he could grab. I can't imagine watching that as a small child. Scary. Dennison said that no one in the house could escape their father's wrath, including himself. My sister, mothers, and I were all in fear of him. He broke my nose, he broke my jaw, he broke my ribs. My father would say he would kill us, he would kill our mother if she ever tried to leave. Different ways that he would do it so that no one would suspect him of killing us. Just days after her birthday, 9 years ago, Saturday, February 19th, 2011. February 19th is my mom's birthday. A single gunshot wound to the chest took Martha Morgan's life. The bullet was shot at close range from a .38 caliber gun. It never exited her body, and she reportedly bled to death alone in her bedroom on Oleander Drive in Shreveport, Louisiana. No one heard this gunshot, but her husband Dennis called 911 that February afternoon, hysterically screaming and telling the operator, "Oh no, my wife just committed suicide." Shreveport police officers arrived to find Martha on her stomach in the bedroom, on the floor, with a gunshot wound to the chest and a gash in her head. Danessa Morgan said, "I got a phone call from my father, and he told us that my mom was dead, that she had killed herself, and my sister and I raced to the scene. I told the police. I pointed my finger right at my father and I said, he did it, because I just knew he did it." That one chilling accusation Dennis has always denied. Dennis Morgan has never been charged with any wrongdoing in Martha's death. When the cops talked to him at the scene, he was distraught. He said that he left the house around 9 a.m. and went to the library and to an ATM. Then he got home around noon and went outside to do yard work. He also mentioned all of this in his 911 phone call. Why? Was he trying to establish some kind of alibi? I don't really know, but that's what I think. Around 2:30, he said that he went inside and he was looking for Martha and the bedroom door was closed. He tried to open the bedroom door, but something was in the way. So he forced it open and he discovered Martha on the floor. The medical examiner put the time of death at the same time as Dennis called 911. Yet Martha already had rigor mortis, so things don't really add up to me or to Dennison and Danessa. According to the Google, rigor mortis generally sets in 3 to 4 hours after death. It peaks at 12 hours and dissipates after 48 hours. So if he left at 9 has shown her mother's case to forensic experts all over the country to try and back up this gut feeling that she has and to potentially get some help. There are so many holes in this case, it's pathetic, said James Lilly, a 25-year-old police veteran from Maryland who works in forensic services. He found out about the case through a colleague and was not paid in any way to look into it. And I'll mention him as the story goes on. So, Danessa believes that fateful February 19th, her father hit her mother in the head with the butt of the gun and then shot her in the chest, staging it to look self-inflicted. He then continued this ruse by planting the suicide seed in the 911 operator's call, which he did say, hey, she committed suicide, but he had over 2.5 hours in the house to plan what he was going to say, says Danessa. Cato Parish Coroner Todd Toma disagrees. He says she had a single gunshot wound to the chest. It was under her left breast, a close-range shot. The shirt was covered in blood, but there was no bullet hole in it, which tells me that she lifted her shirt, lifted her breast, and shot herself. And that's not unusual if a woman with larger breasts is going to commit suicide. Apparently, she was like an F, which, poor woman, that's very large. But, okay, we'll talk about that in just a minute. I don't want to get distracted. Dr. Toma said Martha Morgan shot herself while she was sitting on the bed. But then why was she on her tummy on the floor? He goes on to say, as she bled out, the blood pooled on her legs and rolled down. She would eventually have gotten woozy, lost consciousness, and fell forward onto the ground, which was perfectly consistent with the way that we found her. I kind of thought she would have fallen backwards, but I'm not a doctor. The blood cast-offs from the gun tell him that the door was also closed when she did it. The cast-off from the blood, probably from her hands, as she lay there, and that pattern went all the way across the wall and the door, which meant the door was shut, he explains. Which brings him to the gash in Martha's head. Dennis Morgan said that he had a very hard time getting the door open. Dr. Toma says that Martha's head was in a position where she obstructed the opening of the door. The door would have had to have been forced open, and the corner of the door would have hit her in the forehead. The wound on her forehead was post-mortem. She would have had blood on her face, and there was no blood on her face. Dr. Toma says they have reevaluated the evidence 3 times, always coming to the same conclusion. This was no murder. Martha Morgan committed suicide. Dr. Toma says Dennis could have very easily driven Martha to commit suicide, but he wasn't in the room. He did not pull the trigger. Mr. Lilly said that suspicion should have begun with a 911 call, and I have a tendency to agree. When the 911 operator answered the phone, Dennis screamed, and it sounded very fake, and Mr. Lilly says he thought it was a kid playing a joke. You're saying you just found the body of your wife, and you're immediately saying she committed suicide. If you were not at home, how do you know she wasn't murdered? Which was a very good thought. He also questions police practices at the crime scene. It appears here that the crime scene was not so much what I would call secured, but the problem you have with assuming it's a suicide is how much evidence was lost. He goes on to perform an experiment that I found quite interesting. The weapon used in this case was a Taurus stub-nose, hammerless, 38 caliber, 5-shot revolver. I don't know anything about guns, but he says this weapon could be fired only in a round that was said to have been fired straight with a slight downward angle. Dr. Toma, the medical examiner, gave a couple conflicting accounts as to the distance that the gun was away from Martha when it was fired. At first he said it was fired 4 to 5 inches away. Then he said it was fired 1 inch away. He has offered no explanation for changing the distance, and in an attempt to get a clearer picture of how Martha allegedly shot herself, volunteers were asked to assist in reenacting the scenario provided by James Lilly. 8 women participated. 5 of them were large-breasted. The weapon was a snub-nosed .38 revolver, which is smaller than what Martha used, but not by a whole lot. Attempts to turn the weapon toward the body while utilizing the standard grip proved very difficult, and more so for the large-breasted women. At the same time, it was almost impossible to fire the gun in double action mode. The attempts to fire the gun caused noticeable movement, which severely limited the degree of accuracy. This then raises the question of if Martha could have fired a single straight shot into her body. When applying pressure to the trigger and holding the gun as it would have had to have been held, the weapon began turning to the right. If the weapon had discharged in this position, the bullet would have entered the body at an angle from the right to the left side of Martha's body. All of the women who volunteered to take part in this attempted reenactment asked the same question. Why would she raise her blouse? And one of them added, it doesn't make any sense. All of the women said that they would not shoot themselves under a breast if they chose to end their life by firearm. I also find that a very particular spot to shoot yourself. I also find it very odd that she would have lifted her own shirt. Like, who cares about the shirt at this point? You're not gonna need it in a couple minutes. Anyway, Danessa is on a mission to expose what she really believes happens to her mother, and in her quest for answers, she reaches out to a woman named Anita Shannon, a bloodstain pattern analysis expert. How do you get that job? I feel like I'm qualified to get her professional opinion. We've got patterns on the legs that show that she changed position at least twice, Shannon says. She was either moved or was moved or moved. I think if it is suicide, it is an atypical suicide, said Shannon. Part of Danessa's own personal investigation in this involves a man named Peter Massey, a retired 20-year veteran police officer and a professor at the University of New Haven Forensic Science Department. Massey and his second-year graduate students took a closer look at Martha's case, and he said, "We've come to the conclusion that with the facts, the photographs, the evidence, and the information provided to us, it's inconsistent with what the coroner has determined as the manner of death, suicide." There's a whole bunch of inconsistencies: the location of Martha's body, some of her injuries, the patterns of the blood found upon her, the bed, the wall, and the more glaring is the fatal injury to Miss Morgan. Massey says the way the coroner concluded that Martha shot herself just defies logic. He also found it interesting that she took the time to lift her shirt up to shoot herself, and he said the trajectory, that straight shot trajectory that I talked about earlier, it's not typical to see a perfectly straight shot coming from the top to the bottom. And when he was asked what he believed could have caused the injury to Martha's head, he said it could be a variety of things. A fist, a rock, a loud neighbor, some object other than the door. Ultimately, Massey, his students, Anita Shannon, this case, not a whole lot of photographs translate back to the police department, not properly documenting the scene. You only have one chance to collect evidence and to do it right, and that did not seem to happen here, said Anita Shannon. For Danessa and her brother Dennison, they said there are many unanswered questions that they believe point to murder. Like, for instance, why were their hands not tested for gunpowder residue? Dennis was not tested, and neither was Martha, at least according to the autopsy report. There were no fingerprints on the gun, not even Martha's, who supposedly pulled the trigger. There was no blood on the gun. Dr. Thomas said that they did not conduct a gunshot residue because the test was expensive, but I found one on Amazon for like $50, so can't be that expensive. The coroner said Martha shot herself while sitting up and then she fell to the floor, which we've agreed is pretty consistent to the way that they found her, according to Dr. Toma. I still feel like she would have fallen backwards, but the autopsy report stated that lividity was present over the posterior lateral aspect of the body, meaning in layman's terms that she died with the blood pooling at her back. So if she was found face down, why did it pool at her back? Dennison said that his mom had some suspicious bruises, and it's unclear when they happened, but he believes that she has what he would call defensive wounds on the tops of her hands, from her knuckles to her wrists. The autopsy reports states that there were no injuries on the neck, hands, or face of Martha Morgan, yet the color photographs very clearly show bruising in these areas. The police report also fails to note these injuries, although it is logical to assume that these wounds were not self-inflicted. Lily also points to a couple glaring inconsistencies with the autopsy, specifically the head wound. It wasn't even mentioned in the report except for a brief statement, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Investigators said that it happened when Dennis opened the door because Martha's body was in the way, and you can clearly look at the wound on her head and say, wait, a door did not cause that. A door did not cause that wound. The conclusion is that she was struck with the gun, said Lily. Now, as I mentioned, the autopsy report called the head injury a pink irregular laceration, but Martha was hit in her right front forehead so hard that all of the bone in that area was gone. According to Danessa, I did not look at these. CSI photos 107 and 111 show quite a bit of blood on her mother's forehead and in her hair. She did have some blood around her mouth as well. The coroner said it was post-mortem, but Danessa, every expert that she talked to, disagrees with him. The coroner, also said that the head injury was caused by the door, but the head injury is in the wrong shape, and it doesn't match the shape of the door at all. There's no blood or tissue on the bottom corner of the door, and there was no white paint inside the head injury. On the day of Martha's death, if we go back, Dennis told the police that he was out running errands, library, ATM, and then he came back and did yard work. But his clothes were clean. Now, granted, it's not to say you get terribly messy doing yard work. I was out doing yard work earlier, but his neighbors said his truck was there all morning, and was having an affair. In fact, he remarried this woman 1 day shy of 4 months after Martha died. The coroner says there's one glaring question that could point to suicide that totally debunks Danessa and Dennison's theory, and I do not agree, but okay. 2 months before Martha committed suicide, Danessa called his office and claimed that her mother was suicidal, said Dr. Toma. She was admitted overnight to a psychiatric service, and she convinced them that she didn't mean it, that her daughter must have misunderstood. Dennis agreed to remove the gun from the house, and how she got the gun again, I'm not certain, said Dr. Toma, but 2 months later, she actually did commit suicide. Danessa's response to this: she did not. Let me clarify. My father and her were fighting. She made a statement about using the gun on herself, Danessa said, but she never attempted suicide. She was evaluated at the hospital, and they found her not to be suicidal, that she was just stressed from the domestic violence. She never meant it or said anything about it again. When you're mad, stuff just happens, and my mom has done the same thing, said that she wished she had a gun so she could just kill herself, which scares me a lot, but there's no guns in the house. I think depression and being frustrated with your situation just does that. I don't think that necessarily means you're actually going to do it. But Dr. Toma says, I don't have any doubt that Mrs. Morgan was in an abusive relationship. Oh, okay, dude. I have no doubt that Dennis Morgan was not a saint. In order for Dennis to have committed this murder, Mr. Morgan would have to be a criminal mastermind. From what I've seen of him, he is not a criminal mastermind. I don't think this is criminal mastermind work, but what do I know? I've just researched like a million true crime cases. After 2 years after Martha died, a district attorney wrote to Danessa, and he said, the investigating agencies have ruled it a suicide, and they cannot prosecute based on speculation. Dr. Toma says, my heart goes out to her. She's not been able to accept her mother's suicide, but we have gone above and beyond, and we have met with her several times. Homicide investigators, DAs, the mayor of Shreveport, myself, and my investigators to go over all this evidence, and we keep coming to the same conclusion: suicide. But despite that unwavering declaration, many believe that this case should be reevaluated, myself included. There are claims made from officials that I don't believe are scientifically defensible, said Anita Shannon. I think that the case needs to be looked at through fresh eyes, said Peter Massey. Danessa has been courageous in fighting for the truth about the death of her mother, and getting the truth is vital to getting justice, said Louisiana State Senator John Milkovich. And when he was asked if the case were reopened and the same conclusion reached, would he believe it? Accept it? And he said, no, I won't accept it, because I've seen the evidence, and I know the abuse that was in that home, and I know it wasn't suicide. For Danessa, she's just getting started. She pledges never to give up the fight, to find justice for her mom. I saw several links for a Facebook page, but I couldn't find it. I don't know if it's been taken down. I don't know if the name has been changed. I tried just searching for Martha's name. I tried searching the Justice for Martha. When I click on the link, nothing happens. So I don't know about that. I was going to link it down below. I will link the National Suicide Hotline because this case does involve a potential suicide. But I don't think that Martha committed suicide. I obviously, but so city officials did know him. So Danessa believes that that is why, as many times as the police were called to the house for reports of abuse, which I believe was like 15, he was never arrested, he was never charged, he was never even like put on parole, I don't believe, for anything. They just brushed it under the rug, which is terrible, because how many people is that happening to? That is incredibly scary. But how many cases have we researched here that have been like that? People with money getting away with things. The last one, for instance, I think he murdered her. I don't have an explanation for why her shirt wasn't damaged. I mean, who lifts up somebody's shirt to shoot them? I don't know if maybe he did that thinking that it would take them longer to discover how she died. The big pool of blood on her shirt probably didn't really help that. The only thing I can think is maybe he like ambushed her and she was changing and he put her shirt on her after he killed her, because it would be reasonable that there'd still be blood on the shirt. I don't know. I wish that they had luminoled that room, maybe cleaned some stuff up afterwards. He had a couple hours, because rigor mortis had set in to do something like that, to clean up a mess. I mean, there was some blood spatter, but it wasn't, from the pictures I saw. I didn't look at the pictures of her, but I did look at some blood spatter. It wasn't as much as I expected. There wasn't really like a pool on the floor or anything, which tells me that the shirt absorbed most of it. I don't know, I find that strange. I don't know. I think that he killed her and covered it up and got away with it. His children, I got no statements from Barbie, but Danessa and Dennison do not speak with him. He will not give interviews. He said that she committed suicide and it's over and done with. He moved away. Understandably, new wife doesn't want to be in the same town or whatever, but I imagine that this was very hard on Danessa. She lived